Every other animal humans ever tamed, we can explain. Sheep for food, horses for travel, chickens for eggs. Simple, practical, obvious. Then there's the dog. The first animal humans ever domesticated wasn't food, wasn't transportation, and wasn't even useful yet when the process began. It was one of the most dangerous predators on the continent. A pack hunter. Something that could kill a human without much effort at all. Read that again. Something that could kill you. And somehow, somewhere between 20 and 40,000 years ago, a wild wolf and a human being looked at each other across a fire, and one of them didn't run. Scientists have spent over a century trying to reconstruct exactly how this happened. They've compared thousands of genomes, dug up tens of thousands of bones, argued for decades across 3 different continents about where it started. And one leading dog cognition researcher, when asked to simply picture the moment it began, said this: "I try to imagine how they did it, and I really can't." By the end of this, you'll understand why the most successful interspecies relationship on the planet might have started with something far stranger and far riskier than anyone assumed. Every other domestication story humans tell follows a tidy pattern. Notice an animal has something useful: wool, meat, eggs, muscle, and gradually breed it into a more cooperative, more useful version of itself. The motive comes first. The domestication follows. Compare that to literally every other animal on the standard domestication list. Sheep and goats came roughly 10,000 years ago, alongside the rise of agriculture, specifically because settled farming communities needed a reliable, manageable source of meat, milk, and wool. Cattle followed a similar logic shortly after. Horses arrived even later, domesticated specifically for transportation and labor, once humans already understood exactly what they wanted from the animal before the process even began. In every one of these cases, the practical benefit came first, clearly defined, and the breeding process followed deliberately afterward. The dog breaks that pattern completely. Genetic and archaeological evidence places the beginning of dog domestication somewhere between 20 and 40,000 years ago, an era when humans were still hunter-gatherers, thousands of years before agriculture, before permanent settlements, before humans had domesticated a single other animal for any purpose whatsoever. There was no wool to collect, no farm to guard, no flock to herd, because none of those things existed yet. Which means the wolf, an animal capable of taking down prey many times its own size, working in coordinated packs, was somehow the very first species humans folded into their lives, before any obvious practical benefit existed to explain why. So here's the actual mystery, worth sitting with, the one that genuinely stumps the researchers who study it professionally. Why would a hunter-gatherer group, already competing directly with wolves for the exact same wild prey, tolerate one anywhere near their fire, their food, or their children? Every rational survival instinct should have pointed toward killing it, chasing it off, or simply staying as far away as possible. And yet, somewhere, repeatedly, across an unknown number of separate camps and campfires, that instinct got overridden, quietly and gradually enough that nobody at the time would have recognized they were witnessing the beginning of anything at all. Let's look at what the actual evidence shows, because even the basic facts here are stranger than most people expect. The wolves that became dogs weren't the wolves alive today. Genetic studies comparing modern dog and wolf DNA point to an ancestral, now extinct population of Ice Age wolves distinct from any wolf population currently living. Every dog on the planet right now, from a Chihuahua to a Great Dane, descends from a wild predator that no longer exists anywhere in its original form. Where this actually happened remains genuinely, seriously contested. Researchers have proposed Europe, Central Asia, and East Asia as possible origin points, each backed by real genetic and archaeological evidence, and each contradicted by other evidence pointing somewhere else entirely. Some researchers now argue domestication may have happened more than once, in different regions, with those separate wolf-to-dog lineages later merging and interbreeding as humans themselves, migrated and mixed across the ancient world. Another significant site, Predmosti in the modern Czech Republic, has produced skull remains roughly 27,000 years old that some researchers classify as early proto-dogs based on similar shortened snout, widened skull characteristics, though other researchers dispute that classification. arguing the skulls may simply represent unusually large wolves rather than a distinct domesticated population. That disagreement itself says something important. The transition from wolf to dog wasn't a single, clean event with an obvious before and after. It was a blurry, gradual continuum, which is exactly why modern researchers, even with advanced genetic sequencing tools unavailable a generation ago, still can't fully agree on precisely when wolf ends and dog begins. The physical evidence is just as compelling as the genetics. At Goyet Cave in Belgium, researchers identified skull remains roughly 36,000 years old, showing physical characteristics already distinct from wild wolves: a shortened snout, a wider skull, changes consistent with early domestication already underway. Even more striking is a joint burial discovered at Bonn-Oberkassel in Germany, dated to roughly 14,000 years ago, where a dog was buried alongside two humans. Analysis of the dog's teeth revealed it had survived a serious illness, likely canine distemper, for several weeks, an illness that would have made it completely useless as a hunting or working animal during that time. Someone kept feeding and caring for a sick, non-functional animal anyway, for weeks, and then buried it deliberately alongside actual family members when it eventually died. That detail alone quietly demolishes the assumption that this relationship began purely as cold, practical utility. Here's a common assumption worth challenging directly: that ancient humans deliberately captured wild wolf pups and tamed them by hand. Read that again, though, because most researchers who actually study this professionally don't think that's one generation at a time, through patient, intentional effort, essentially adopting wild predators on purpose. What happened at all? The leading alternative is called self-domestication, and it flips the entire narrative around. Rather than humans choosing wolves, the theory suggests wolves chose humans. Wherever hunter-gatherer camps existed, discarded bones, scraps, and food waste created a genuinely reliable, low-effort food source sitting right at the edge of human settlements. Most wolves, wired with a strong natural fear of humans, would have avoided that food. Simply born with less fear, calmer temperaments, a slightly reduced flight response, entirely rather than risk the encounter. But a small number of individual wolves would have been willing to approach. Those bolder, calmer wolves ate more reliably, survived better, and passed that same reduced fear temperament onto their offspring. Generation after generation, natural selection kept favoring wolves that could tolerate human proximity, entirely without a single human ever deciding to breed them on purpose. There's genuinely remarkable supporting evidence for how fast and how thoroughly this kind of selection can reshape an animal. In a famous, decades-long Soviet experiment, researcher Dmitry Belyaev bred silver foxes using a single selection criterion: tameness, and tameness alone, nothing about appearance. The Belyaev fox experiment deserves little more detail because the specifics make the underlying mechanism considerably easier to grasp. Belyaev and his research team selected only the calmest, least fearful fox kits from each generation to breed forward, testing each one's reaction to human presence and discarding temperament entirely as a factor in every other decision. By around the 10th generation, some foxes were actively seeking out human attention, wagging their tails, and behaving in ways strikingly similar to a friendly dog rather than a wild fox. Nobody had bred for floppy ears or curly tails specifically. Those traits simply came along for the ride, likely connected to the same underlying developmental and hormonal pathways that also happen to regulate fear and stress response. If tameness alone can trigger that cascade of unrelated physical changes in captivity, deliberately engineered in a matter of decades, it becomes considerably easier to imagine natural selection accomplishing something similar across thousands of wild generations entirely without any human designing the outcome on purpose. There's a second theory worth mentioning too, one that approaches the same mystery from an entirely different angle. Some researchers have proposed that ancient humans, eating diets extremely high in protein from lean, wild game, may have physically struggled to process that much protein alone and needed somewhere to offload the excess. Wolves, capable of eating far higher protein diets safely than humans can, may have willingly taken whatever fatty, protein-heavy scraps humans couldn't use. creating a genuinely mutual, if accidental, nutritional partnership from the very beginning. Whichever specific mechanism turns out to be correct, and researchers are still actively debating it, the underlying pattern is the same. This wasn't one clever human deciding to adopt a wolf pup. It was a slow, mutual, largely accidental negotiation, run by natural selection itself over countless generations, with neither species fully in control of where it was heading. Let's go even further because once dogs existed, they didn't just sit quietly at the edge of camp. They fundamentally changed what human groups were capable of doing. A dog's senses of smell and hearing dramatically outperform a human's in almost every practical respect, and that difference translated directly into better, more successful hunts. Dogs could track wounded prey across terrain a human alone would lose the trail on. Entirely corner fast-moving animals long enough for a hunter to catch up and detect approaching danger long before human senses would register anything at all. Groups with dogs almost certainly out-hunted and out-survived groups without them, a genuinely significant evolutionary advantage packed into a single interspecies partnership. That advantage likely helped set up everything that came after. Some researchers argue dogs functioned as an essential stepping stone toward the broader domestication of other animals entirely. Herding and guarding livestock, sheep, goats, and eventually cattle required exactly the skill set dogs had already spent thousands of years refining. Without dogs already deeply integrated into human life, managing herds of easily scattered prey animals at any meaningful scale would have been considerably harder, possibly delaying the entire agricultural revolution that eventually reshaped human civilization. As humans and dogs spread together into wildly different environments, deliberate selective breeding eventually took over from natural selection, and the results diversified dramatically. Sled-pulling breeds developed in the Arctic, north, where speed and cold tolerance across long distances meant the difference between a successful hunt and starvation. Scent-tracking breeds developed wherever dense forest made visual tracking unreliable. Small, alert breeds developed specifically to guard grain stores from rodents once agriculture made large-scale food storage necessary. Each regional population of humans, facing a different specific survival problem, ended up shaping the dogs around them into an increasingly specialized tool, without losing the original underlying companionship that had started the entire relationship in the first place. Herding roles deserve particular attention here because they illustrate just how directly dogs enabled the next major leap in human civilization, managing dozens or hundreds of skittish, scattering sheep or goats across open terrain is an extraordinarily difficult task for humans working alone. A trained herding dog, moving faster than any human and instinctively reading and controlling. A fleeing animal's body language made large-scale livestock management genuinely feasible for the first time. Some historians argue that without dogs already established as working partners, the agricultural revolution itself might have unfolded considerably more slowly or looked completely different. The archaeological record shows dogs spreading alongside humans into essentially every environment our species ever reached. Dogs accompanied the earliest humans into the Americas, with genetic evidence showing distinct ancient American dog lineages traveling across the land bridge from Siberia thousands of years before European contact. Wherever humans went, dogs consistently went too, adapting to desert, tundra, forest, and coastline alike, right alongside the humans they'd attached themselves to. The emotional and symbolic role deepened just as fast as the practical one. Deliberate dog burials, sometimes elaborate, sometimes accompanied by tools, ornaments, or food offerings, clearly meant for the animal itself show up across dozens of ancient cultures on multiple continents. Cultures with no meaningful contact with one another, independently arriving at the same basic instinct. This specific animal deserved more than being simply discarded when it died. Here's where it gets a little uncomfortable, in a genuinely interesting way. The self-domestication story isn't some closed chapter from deep prehistory. Something strikingly similar is still. Major cities today show measurable behavioral shifts toward reduced fear of humans, happening quietly in cities right now. Urban foxes, coyotes, and even certain bird populations in some researchers explicitly comparing the pattern to the earliest stages of exactly the same process. that once turned wolves into dogs. The animals bold enough to tolerate human proximity get consistent access to food waste and shelter. The shy, fearful ones stay away and get less. Given enough uninterrupted generations, you'd expect the same slow selection pressure to start reshaping those populations too, just like it once reshaped an ancient wolf. Researchers studying these urban populations have documented measurable changes already underway. Slightly shorter snouts in some urban fox populations compared to their rural relatives, smaller brains relative to body size in some cases, changes that echo in miniature. The exact physical shifts researchers associate with the earliest stages of wolf-to-dog transformation. Nobody is deliberately breeding these animals. The same quiet, patient mechanism that built the entire relationship between humans and dogs in the first place may simply be running again, in real time, in alleyways and city parks, largely unnoticed by the millions of people walking past it every single day. Your own dog, curled up asleep on the couch, right now still carries a visible trace of this entire deep history, whether you notice it or not. That instinctive tilt of the head at an unfamiliar sound, the low warning growl at an approaching stranger, the specific, food-driven loyalty toward the person who reliably feeds them. Every one of those behaviors is a direct descendant of a wild wolf that decided tens of thousands of years ago that the risk of approaching a human campfire was, on balance, worth taking. So let's bring this together. We tend to imagine dog domestication as a clean, deliberate human decision, someone picking out a wolf pup and gradually taming it through patience and intention. That's almost certainly not what happened. From an ancient, now extinct wolf population to bones showing early physical change tens of thousands of years ago, to a sick dog nursed back to health and buried among humans who clearly loved it, to natural selection quietly rewarding calmer, bolder wolves without anyone planning it. Dog domestication looks far less like an invention and far more like a slow, mutual negotiation that neither species fully controlled. Consider the scale of what that partnership eventually 350 recognized breeds worldwide, ranging from animals small enough to fit in, produced. Starting from one now extinct ancestral wolf population, dogs have since diversified into more than read that again, 350. That kind of variation. A coat pocket to working breeds capable of pulling loads many times their own body. Produced from a single ancestral species in a relatively short evolutionary window, has no real parallel anywhere else in the domesticated animal kingdom. None of this diminishes what eventually resulted. If anything, it makes the outcome considerably more remarkable. Humans didn't simply conquer or tame a dangerous predator through force and cleverness. Something closer to a genuine cross-species collaboration unfolded instead, built patiently across thousands of generations, by individuals on both sides who had no idea they were founding the single most. This actually makes dogs, even among domesticated animals, nearly every other species humans eventually tamed. Successful interspecies partnership our planet has ever produced. It's worth sitting with just how unusual still exists in enormous numbers, in a truly wild, undomesticated form somewhere on Earth. Wild sheep, wild cattle ancestors, wild horses in isolated pockets. The wolf population that actually became the dog isn't one of them. It's gone entirely, leaving dogs as the only living descendants of a genetic lineage that essentially bet everything on a relationship with a behavior. Why a golden retriever and a wolf genetically close enough to still interbreed, or later by deliberate human breeding, doesn't need very much time at all to reshape, can look and act so completely differently. Selection pressure, whether driven by natural survival advantage. A species dramatically, once temperament itself becomes the trait being selected for, generation after generation, without interruption. That wolf from the beginning, the one that didn't run, wasn't tricked and wasn't captured. It made a choice, or something close enough to a choice that the distinction barely matters anymore, and countless generations of its descendants have been making a quiet variation of that same choice ever since, every single day, in millions of homes around the world, and none of it required a single written plan. It required only the same patient, unglamorous mechanism behind nearly every deep human-animal relationship in this history. repeated proximity, repeated tolerance, and enough successive generations for small, unplanned advantages to quietly accumulate into something neither species could have predicted at the very beginning. This also means the story of dog domestication was never really finished at any single point in prehistory. It has simply continued, uninterrupted, in a different form, for tens of thousands of years, through every subsequent generation of humans who chose which dogs to feed, which to breed, and which to keep close, right up through the specific choice you or someone you know made the day a particular dog came home for the first time. 40,000 years is a long time for a relationship to keep working, uninterrupted, without either side fully understanding how it started. Most partnerships that old don't survive because someone planned them carefully was still worth it. So the next time your dog rests its head on your, they survive because generation after generation, enough individuals on both sides kept quietly deciding it. Knee, or refuses to leave your side during a storm, don't think of it as a trained behavior or a simple trick of evolution. Think of it as the echo of a decision made tens of thousands of years ago by a wolf standing at the edge of a fire, choosing against every reasonable instinct to stay.